"You shouldn't be here," Officer Dalton barked, his words slicing through the crisp autumn air like a snapped wire. Jasmine Carter froze mid-step, her backpack sliding slightly from her shoulder as she stared at the two officers standing at the entrance of the city park. Rain had started to mist down in fine threads, tracing patterns across the asphalt and turning the fallen leaves to glossy amber and red. Around them, the city hummed quietly. Distant horns echoed from the main street. Dogs barked faintly somewhere beyond the wrought iron fence, and a few early joggers zipped past, oblivious to the tension unfolding. Jasmine's eyes, deep brown and steady, scanned the wet pavement beneath her sneakers. She adjusted the strap of her worn canvas backpack and straightened, feeling the cool weight of her textbooks against her back, a reminder that she was more than just another teenager walking home from school. The officers, both towering and broad-shouldered, their badges glinting against the soft gray of their rain-dampened uniforms, blocked the path like gatekeepers of a world Jasmine had always been taught to navigate carefully. Officer Rick Simmons smirked, a slow, deliberate curl of his lips that carried a confidence born of unquestioned authority, while Dalton's gaze drilled into her with an intensity meant to unsettle. "Step aside, girl," Dalton said, voice low but firm, intended to command and intimidate. Jasmine inhaled, the scent of wet leaves and city asphalt filling her senses, her heartbeat steadying as she reminded herself that fear could not make her small, it could not bend her posture. Her voice, calm yet resonant, broke through the quiet patter of rain. "I'm not stepping aside because you're wrong." The words hung in the air, tangible and charged, making the few scattered pedestrians pause mid-stride. Dalton's brows knitted, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face, while Simmons' smirk wavered for just a heartbeat. Jasmine took another careful step forward, her wet sneakers pressing against the slick concrete, droplets scattering with each movement, the rhythm of her footfalls marking a silent defiance. The mist caught the streetlights, turning each droplet into a suspended jewel, and in that soft glow, her determined eyes met their skeptical ones. Around them, the city's hum dimmed, the distant echoes of tires and voices retreating as if the world itself was holding its breath. She could feel the wind tugging at the hem of her jacket, the chilled mist brushing against her face, yet her stance remained unwavering, grounded by the knowledge that the strength she carried was unseen but undeniable. Every muscle in her body, from the poised shoulders to the firmly planted feet, whispered confidence, a silent signal that she was anchored in truth. Dalton opened his mouth, a retort poised to assert dominance, yet the words stalled, meeting the unexpected resolve in her gaze. Simmons shifted slightly, the gravel under his boots crunching faintly, a subtle tremor betraying the first hint of doubt. Jasmine's lips curved ever so slightly, not a smile, but a quiet acknowledgement of the moral gravity she wielded in this moment, a force invisible yet pressing, challenging the assumptions that had brought the officers to her path. The mist continued to fall, the wet sheen on the pavement reflecting fragmented streetlights, as if the city itself mirrored the fractured authority confronting her. In that suspended moment, the ordinary park transformed into a stage, every leaf, every droplet, every shadow conspiring to heighten the tension, to make the silent moral stand resonate. She straightened her spine, the backpack snug against her shoulders, a subtle reminder of her history, her discipline, and the unspoken legacy she carried, inherited from a father whose shadow loomed far beyond the boundaries of the park. And as Dalton finally swallowed a response, the tension rippling through the space like an electric current, Jasmine remained still, a singular figure of composed defiance amidst the drizzle, the city, and the hovering expectation that justice, though unseen, could never be ignored. The rain had eased into a light drizzle, leaving the park glistening under the soft glow of the streetlights. Jasmine Carter walked along the winding path toward the bus stop, the wet leaves crunching softly beneath her sneakers. The mist hung in the air, curling around the trunks of oak trees, and the distant hum of the city felt muted, as if it were listening. Her backpack felt heavier than usual, not because of the textbooks, but because of the weight of awareness she carried, the understanding that every glance from passers-by seemed to measure her, to gauge her worth. Jasmine had grown up moving from one neighborhood to another, from one school to the next, always adapting, always observing, yet keeping herself quietly present. Her father, Colonel Marcus Carter, had instilled in her a sense of discipline and respect for the world, teaching her that power was not always visible, that strength often lay in patience, in observation, in choosing the right moment to act. She remembered mornings spent in the basement of their modest home, tracing maps and reading history books under the soft hum of the fluorescent light, her father explaining strategy, planning, and the importance of awareness in every decision. Those lessons were invisible armor, and now they felt tangible, wrapping around her as she continued down the damp path. The park, usually a place for laughter and casual strolls, felt different tonight. Every shadow seemed slightly longer, every reflection on the wet pavement slightly distorted. Jasmine adjusted her jacket, pulling it tighter against the cool mist, and took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat sync with the soft splatter of raindrops. She could see the faint glow of the bus stop ahead, the yellow light reflecting off puddles like molten gold, and she moved toward it with a quiet confidence that belied her age. People around her walked with umbrellas, some hurrying, some pausing to shake off raindrops, yet no one noticed the subtle determination in her stride, the way her eyes scanned the environment, calculating, aware, alert. In those moments, Jasmine felt both vulnerable and empowered, a paradox she had come to understand well. She was accustomed to being underestimated, to being dismissed as just another girl, yet she knew the truth about herself, the knowledge, skill, and resilience she carried. As she reached the bus stop, the metal bench, glistening with rain, she took a moment to look up at the city skyline, the buildings rising like silent sentinels against the cloudy night. The windows reflected the soft amber of streetlights and the occasional neon sign, and she felt a surge of calm clarity, a reminder that perspective often changed everything. Jasmine's gaze then shifted to the people around her, noting their hurried expressions, the tension in their shoulders, and she realized that most did not see the small acts of courage in everyday life. She adjusted the strap of her backpack once more, the books pressing against her back, a tangible reminder of her purpose, and allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, recognizing that tonight, as always, she carried both the quiet strength of her upbringing and the awareness that every decision, every step, held the potential to shape not only her own path, but the reactions of those around her. The bus pulled up slowly, its headlights cutting through the mist, reflecting off puddles and fragmented streaks, and Jasmine stepped forward, each movement deliberate, confident, and measured, ready to continue her journey through a world that often misunderstood her, yet could never diminish the quiet authority she carried within. The bus rattled slowly along the wet city streets, its headlights casting long, fragmented reflections across the puddles that mirrored the darkening sky. Jasmine Carter held onto the overhead strap with one hand, her other hand resting lightly on the edge of her backpack, feeling the subtle thrum of the bus engine beneath her. Through the window, the familiar sights of the neighborhood blurred into streaks of color and light. Apartment buildings rose like quiet sentinels, their windows glowing softly, and the occasional car passed, leaving a brief trail of red taillights before disappearing into the night. Inside the bus, the air was filled with the low murmur of conversations, the rustle of newspapers, the soft sighs of passengers shifting in their seats, and yet, in this ambient hum, Jasmine felt a heightened sense of observation. Every movement of the people around her, every glance exchanged, seemed magnified, each subtle gesture carrying potential meaning. She adjusted her posture, sitting up straighter, shoulders squared, her gaze steady as she traced the rhythm of the passing streetlights, noting how they flickered against wet pavement, how the shadows of tree branches stretched and contracted with the sway of the bus. Jasmine reflected on the lessons her father, Colonel Marcus Carter, had imparted, to remain aware, to recognize the power of presence, and to understand that authority often relied on perception as much as it did on position. Those teachings had shaped the way she moved through the world, instilling a quiet confidence that now anchored her amidst uncertainty. As the bus slowed at an intersection, she watched a delivery truck slide to a stop in the rain, the driver leaning slightly forward as if peering through the mist, and she noted the subtle tension in his posture, the way hands gripped the steering wheel, an unconscious expression of control. Jasmine allowed herself a deep, steadying breath, feeling the pulse of her heartbeat in her chest, the cool, damp air mingling with the faint scent of rain-soaked asphalt, and recognized the interplay of control, observation, and reaction that played out around her. She ran her fingers along the strap of her backpack, the fabric dampened slightly by the drizzle, and felt the reassuring weight of her textbooks against her back, a symbol of preparedness and thoughtfulness. The bus slowed again to pick up a small group of students, their laughter light but carrying a touch of nervous energy, and Jasmine observed without judgment, noting how they adjusted their backpacks, exchanged glances, and moved as a unit, aware of the social dynamics that ebbed and flowed even in simple routines. Her own reflection in the window caught her eye, distorted by the streaks of rain, and she studied the firmness in her expression, the clarity in her eyes, the calm determination that had carried her through the afternoon and now continued to guide her through the ride. The bus rumbled over a manhole cover, and the vibration traveled through her seat, a reminder of the physical reality beneath the abstract patterns she observed, grounding her in the present. With each passing block, Jasmine mentally mapped the streets, the lampposts, the storefronts, considering how the interplay of light and shadow, of visibility and perception, could influence encounters, teaching her once again that awareness was a tool, as valuable as any physical skill or knowledge she possessed. She straightened once more as the bus turned a corner, the wet leaves brushing along the sidewalk in rhythmic whispers, and felt the balance between observation and movement, the harmony of remaining calm yet ready, grounded yet perceptive. Jasmine understood that each moment contained potential choices, each glance, each step, each measured breath was part of an intricate dance of presence, a careful orchestration of attention and action that prepared her for whatever lay ahead beyond the bus doors. The city, the streets, the faint echoes of distant traffic, and the subtle patterns of rain on glass coalesced into a backdrop against which she remained quietly poised, a young woman carrying both history and intent, learning to navigate the complex layers of interaction, aware that her preparation, her awareness, and her quiet confidence were just as vital as any external validation she could receive. As the bus approached her stop, Jasmine Carter could see the familiar outline of the neighborhood through the streaked window, the wet asphalt reflecting the yellow glow of streetlights like molten ribbons stretching into the distance. She rose from her seat just before the bus slowed to a gentle halt, gripping the overhead strap with one hand as the other steadied the backpack against her shoulder. The door hissed open, letting in a cool draft carrying the faint scent of rain and distant exhaust from the early evening traffic. Stepping onto the slick pavement, her sneakers made a soft scuffing sound against the wet surface as she walked toward the sidewalk lined with oaks and maples, their leaves glossy and darkened by the drizzle. The street was quiet now, only the occasional car passing with its headlights catching on the water-laden leaves, sending brief flashes of white and amber across the sidewalk. Jasmine adjusted her jacket collar, feeling the dampness that had seeped through the fabric during the ride, and allowed herself a slow exhale, sensing the calm clarity of her own presence in the midst of ordinary city life. Ahead, the faint outline of the small community park came into view, its iron gates slightly ajar, offering a shortcut through to the street where she would turn toward her home. She noted the subtle details around her, the patterned reflections on the puddles, the rhythmic sway of hanging branches, the distant chirp of a lone bird perched under an awning, and allowed each observation to anchor her in the present, a practice her father had emphasized countless times. Her steps were measured, her gaze steady as she scanned the surroundings, noting the posture and movement of pedestrians passing by, the subtle changes in the wind, and the texture of the wet sidewalk beneath her feet. Each motion, each breath, was deliberate, reflecting the quiet discipline and awareness cultivated from years of attentive learning. Jasmine's thoughts drifted briefly to the evening ahead, her homework waiting in the small apartment she shared with her father, the routine that always offered comfort and structure, yet tonight carried an added layer of anticipation, a sense that the ordinary world could shift at any moment depending on the choices she made and the interactions she navigated. She walked past the flickering light of a corner store, the neon sign casting a soft, rhythmic glow, and felt the familiar blend of vigilance and composure that had become second nature. Passing the last row of streetlights before the small footbridge connecting to her street, Jasmine's senses heightened subtly, noting the gentle ripple of water under the bridge, the distant murmur of voices carried faintly on the breeze, the way the mist clung to surfaces, softening edges and creating a landscape that demanded attention. She adjusted her backpack once more, the weight grounding her, a tactile reminder of readiness and responsibility. Her eyes traced the details in her immediate environment, the patterns of light and shadow, the rhythm of her own steps, the interplay between perception and awareness. And she felt the steady pulse of confidence that came from recognizing that while the world could be unpredictable, her responses were under her own control. Each movement through the streets, each careful observation, reinforced her sense of presence, a quiet assertion of self in a city that often overlooked subtle strength. The hum of distant traffic, the gentle patter of the residual drizzle, and the soft sway of trees combined into a sensory tapestry in which Jasmine moved deliberately, with a rhythm and awareness that reflected not only her upbringing, but also an innate understanding of timing, presence, and consequence. By the time she reached the corner of her street, the low hum of her apartment building and the warm light spilling from its windows greeted her, and she paused for a moment to draw in a full breath, feeling the weight of both preparation and anticipation settle evenly across her shoulders as she stepped toward the building entrance, ready to engage with whatever challenges the evening might bring. As Jasmine Carter approached the small footbridge at the end of her street, the dim amber glow of the streetlights reflected in the shallow puddles, casting a lattice of light and shadow across the wet pavement. She paused briefly, her eyes scanning the quiet neighborhood, noting the subtle rustle of leaves in the cool evening breeze, the distant hum of a car engine, and the soft, rhythmic drip of water from the eaves above. The bridge, with its iron railings slick with rain, stretched ahead, and she felt the familiar texture of the metal under her fingertips as she steadied herself, the sensation grounding her amidst the residual tension of the day. Across the street, a few residents passed, their footsteps muffled by the damp leaves, umbrellas held tight, and she observed their movements with the practiced attention her father had taught her, noting the subtle shifts in posture and gaze that could reveal more than words ever could. As she walked, the crisp autumn air filled her lungs, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and distant pine, and she felt a calm clarity settle over her, a quiet readiness that contrasted with the uncertainty lingering from earlier encounters. Jasmine adjusted the strap of her backpack, feeling the familiar weight of her books, a tactile reminder of preparation and knowledge, and she allowed herself a small, steadying breath. The park beyond the bridge was partially illuminated by flickering lamps, their light pooling on the wet grass and casting elongated shadows across the path, and she noted how the interplay of light and darkness created a landscape of subtle contrasts, a reminder that perception and attention could shift outcomes even in the simplest circumstances. Her footsteps made gentle splashes as she crossed the bridge, each movement deliberate, measured, and imbued with a quiet confidence, the rhythm of her steps blending with the distant sound of dripping water from rooftops. Jasmine's eyes traced the surrounding environment, observing the faint glimmer of windows in nearby homes, the occasional flash of a tail light down the street, and the subtle sway of branches overhead, allowing herself to remain present and alert to details others might overlook. As she descended onto the far side of the bridge, the concrete path leading toward her home felt solid beneath her sneakers, and she sensed the balance between readiness and composure, the equilibrium that came from years of disciplined awareness. She noticed the gentle undulations of the street, the way the rain had gathered in shallow pockets, and adjusted her steps to accommodate, the tactile feedback reinforcing her sense of control and presence. In the distance, a lamppost flickered briefly, casting a soft, wavering circle of light that illuminated her path, and she allowed the gentle movement of shadows to sharpen her perception, attuning her senses to every subtle change in her surroundings. Jasmine's attention extended to the smallest details, the faint aroma of baked goods from a nearby corner bakery, the muffled sound of conversation drifting from a living room window, the sheen of moisture on parked vehicles, all forming a rich tapestry of sensory input that informed her cautious, yet confident navigation through the evening. With each measured step, she felt the quiet assertion of her own presence, the integrity of her awareness reinforcing the sense that while the world presented uncertainties, her observations, preparedness, and poise formed an unshakable anchor. She approached the corner where her apartment building stood, noting the familiar glow from the entranceway, the faint murmur of activity within, and felt the subtle reassurance of returning to a known space, a place where the lessons of attentiveness, patience, and composure were not only valued but essential. Jasmine paused briefly at the building entrance, taking in a full, deliberate breath, feeling the cool, damp air against her face, and allowed herself to center, recognizing that every step taken, every choice made along the path, carried the potential to shape her experience, and that the quiet strength she cultivated within would continue to guide her through the complexities and subtleties of the world outside. Inside the apartment building, the warm glow of overhead lights contrasted with the damp coolness of the evening outside. Jasmine Carter stepped off the sidewalk and onto the polished tiles of the lobby, each footstep echoing softly against the marble floor. The familiar scent of polished wood and faint undertones of lemon cleaner welcomed her, mingling with the residual dampness carried in from the streets. She took a moment to let her eyes adjust, observing the patterns of light reflecting off the glass doors and the subtle play of shadows along the walls, the quiet stillness of the building offering a sense of reprieve from the external world. With each step, she felt the grounding weight of the moment, the rhythm of her own breathing aligning with the steady pulse of her heartbeat, creating a calm cadence amidst the ambient hum of the elevators and the faint mechanical whir of the heating system. Jasmine moved toward the elevator bank, noticing the gleam of brass handrails and the faint reflection of her own determined posture in the mirrored panels lining the walls. She pressed the call button, the soft ding echoing through the lobby, and felt the anticipation of the brief pause, the suspended time before the doors opened, a familiar moment of quiet reflection that allowed her to center herself. When the elevator arrived, the doors glided open with a smooth, almost imperceptible hiss, revealing the clean interior bathed in warm light, the polished metal surfaces catching her reflection in soft, distorted patterns. Jasmine stepped inside, the cool metal floor beneath her sneakers a contrast to the warmth above, and pressed the button for her apartment, feeling the subtle vibration of the mechanism engage, a gentle reassurance of the machinery at work. As the elevator ascended, she allowed herself to scan the familiar route, observing the subtle variations in the glow of the indicator lights, the faint hum of the motor, and the muted reflections of the world outside the elevator walls. It was a private space, a moment suspended between the external unpredictability of the city and the controlled environment of home, and Jasmine embraced the stillness, feeling the quiet strength that had been cultivated through years of discipline and awareness. She traced the outline of the panel with her fingers, noting the smooth surface and the slight coolness beneath her touch, a tactile anchor to keep her present. As the elevator reached her floor, the soft chime announced the arrival, and the doors slid open to reveal the hallway, lined with familiar doors and the gentle glow of recessed lighting casting elongated shadows along the carpeted floor. Jasmine stepped forward, each footfall deliberate, the subtle sound muted against the soft texture of the carpet, and she felt the tension of the earlier evening dissipate into a reflective calm. Her apartment door appeared ahead, the brass handle gleaming faintly, a familiar threshold separating the private sanctuary of home from the complex dynamics of the world outside. Jasmine paused for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the cool metal of the doorknob, feeling the quiet weight of the day settle into a reflective pause. Inside, the apartment was bathed in a soft, golden light that seemed to stretch across the living room, highlighting the subtle textures of furniture and the muted color of the walls. She let herself exhale fully, allowing the atmosphere of safety and solitude to envelop her, the residual drizzle from outside dripping faintly from her jacket onto a small mat near the door. Jasmine moved toward the window overlooking the quiet street, her gaze following the soft reflections of streetlights in the wet pavement below, and she allowed a moment of silent contemplation, her thoughts tracing the details of her journey home, the interactions, and the awareness she had maintained, reaffirming the inner composure and quiet confidence that guided her steps in every environment. The room felt alive with subtle motion, the gentle sway of curtains, the faint flicker of light on the walls, and she recognized the interplay between presence and reflection, a calm preparation for the moments yet to come, each one shaped by observation, awareness, and the inner strength that defined her. As Jasmine Carter turned toward the window, the quiet hum of the city stretched below her like a distant melody, the occasional streetlight flickering in a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, a subtle dance of light and shadow across the wet pavement. She traced the contours of the buildings, noting the reflections of passing headlights in rain-slicked streets, the soft glow of apartment windows, and the faint movement of people returning home, each small gesture carrying a sense of life, continuing quietly despite the tension she had experienced earlier. The phone on the kitchen counter buzzed softly, a gentle vibration that pulled her attention, and when she lifted it, the screen displayed a number she recognized immediately. Her father, Colonel Marcus Carter. Her fingers hesitated for a brief moment, the weight of anticipation pressing against the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, before she answered, her voice calm but attentive. "Hello, Jasmine," her father said, his tone even, carrying the authority of experience without impatience, a measured cadence that immediately commanded attention. Jasmine felt the familiar warmth of reassurance, the quiet strength that had always anchored her through the lessons and expectations he had imparted over the years. He continued, detailing observations from his own vantage point, referencing people and places with precise attention, the kind of analytical clarity he had taught her to appreciate. Jasmine listened, noting the subtle shifts in his inflection, the way he emphasized certain details, and she realized that the unfolding situation outside, the dynamics of control, presence, and perception, were being assessed with the same meticulous care she had learned to apply herself. The conversation flowed naturally, each pause deliberate, each exchange building an unspoken framework of understanding between them, a shared language of strategy and awareness. Jasmine reflected on how her father's presence extended beyond simple authority, shaping not just actions but perceptions, influencing outcomes through a calm, deliberate assertion of insight. As she listened, her gaze drifted again to the city below, the wet streets catching the soft glow of streetlights, the occasional car moving silently, and she considered the interplay of visibility and influence, of presence and recognition. The quiet tension of earlier moments returned to her mind, the observations of people, the subtle postures, the nuances of authority she had witnessed on her walk and on the bus, all now reframed by the understanding that her own awareness was part of a larger continuum of influence. The mist outside clung to the edges of the window pane, softening the outlines of distant buildings, and Jasmine's reflection merged with the softened urban landscape, a visual metaphor for the convergence of perception and reality. She allowed herself a small, steadying breath, feeling the calm authority of her own preparation and insight, the resonance of lessons learned and applied. The conversation concluded with her father's acknowledgement of her composure and vigilance, a silent affirmation of the capabilities she carried, and Jasmine set the phone down gently, her posture straightening as she absorbed the significance of the moment. The room around her seemed quieter now, filled with the soft ambient sounds of a city settling into evening, the faint creak of the buildings settling, the occasional distant hum of traffic, all underscoring the poised, reflective atmosphere. Jasmine walked toward the living room, her steps deliberate, observing the subtle shifts in lighting, the textures of furniture, the small details that often went unnoticed, and she felt the quiet satisfaction of preparedness, the inner clarity that comes from awareness, reflection, and understanding. Outside, the mist continued to blur the cityscape, and she recognized that the interplay of light, shadow, presence, and perception extended beyond the apartment, connecting the spaces she inhabited with the larger, more complex world beyond, and she remained grounded, poised, and aware, ready for the unfolding events that would require both her calm observation and the insight inherited from a lifetime of careful guidance. The night deepened outside Jasmine Carter's apartment window, the city lights casting muted reflections on the glass as she moved toward the living room, her steps soft against the carpet. The gentle hum of distant traffic, the occasional flicker of neon from a nearby store, and the subtle rustle of leaves carried on the cool evening breeze created a serene backdrop for reflection. Jasmine paused by the large window overlooking the street below, observing the puddles that mirrored the glow of lampposts and the faint silhouettes of pedestrians moving quietly along sidewalks. Her thoughts returned to the earlier events, the subtle tensions, and the interplay of observation, presence, and composure that had defined her walk home and the quiet interactions that had unfolded. She reflected on the lessons instilled by her father, Colonel Marcus Carter, recognizing how the discipline of awareness and patience could influence outcomes even when unseen. Jasmine's hands rested lightly on the windowsill, the cool surface grounding her as she considered the ripple effects of calm presence, quiet decision-making, and the subtle assertion of integrity. The apartment itself was bathed in warm light, highlighting the textures of furniture, the muted tones of walls, and the interplay of shadows that moved gently with the sway of curtains in the soft breeze from a slightly open window. Every detail seemed amplified in her mind, from the polished wood of the bookshelf to the faint reflection of the ceiling light on the surface of the coffee table, each a reminder of the calm order that surrounded her and the clarity it afforded. Jasmine allowed herself a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat align with the quiet cadence of the apartment, a silent affirmation of the strength derived from observation and understanding. Her gaze drifted toward the door, the soft hinges and the subtle creak as it moved under the weight of her father's presence in her mind, a comforting echo of the authority that had shaped her life without imposing fear. She considered the nuances of influence, how the smallest details in posture, tone, and attention could subtly shift perception and response, reinforcing the idea that power often resided in awareness and the measured application of action. The soft ticking of a clock on the wall punctuated the stillness, each second a gentle reminder of time's passage and the rhythm that connected past lessons to present practice. Jasmine's eyes lingered on the street below, where the glow of distant traffic lights cast elongated patterns across wet pavement, and she noted the quiet patience in the movement of night pedestrians, each step deliberate, each gesture a reflection of their own awareness and intent. She straightened, her posture poised, feeling the weight of quiet confidence and the readiness that came from careful attention and thoughtful preparation. The room, the soft illumination, the reflections, and the subtle shifts in sound and light all coalesced into a canvas upon which she could observe, reflect, and integrate the events of the day, the lessons learned, and the knowledge that presence, patience, and integrity were as impactful as any overt display of authority. Jasmine allowed the calm to settle fully around her, the gentle hum of city life, the filtered light, and the rhythmic sounds of night creating a space in which she could internalize the strength she carried, knowing that the influence of observation, composure, and ethical action extended beyond the apartment walls and into every interaction she would face, quietly shaping outcomes, perceptions, and the respect she commanded without ever raising her voice or demanding recognition. The first light of dawn began to stretch across the city skyline, soft tendrils of pink and gold brushing against the edges of tall buildings and reflecting faintly on the wet streets below. Jasmine Carter stood by the window of her apartment, the cool morning air flowing gently through the partially open window, carrying the faint aroma of rain-soaked concrete and blooming jasmine from the planter boxes along the street. She observed the subtle awakening of the neighborhood, the quiet stir of early pedestrians, the occasional bicycle bell echoing softly across the sidewalks, and the gentle hum of distant traffic gradually increasing with the rhythm of a city coming to life. Her hands rested lightly on the windowsill, feeling the cool smoothness of the paint beneath her fingers, and she allowed herself to take in the entirety of the moment, the interplay of light and shadow, the gentle rise of mist curling around street lamps, and the delicate movements of the world beyond the glass. Jasmine's eyes scanned the streets carefully, noting the subtle reflections on puddles, the faint movement of leaves, and the occasional ripple caused by a passing vehicle, all details blending into a mosaic of calm observation. Her posture remained poised, upright, the familiar grounding weight of her backpack now resting beside her on the floor, a reminder of the discipline and preparedness she had carried throughout the previous day. She allowed a long, slow breath to fill her lungs, noticing the rhythmic tapping of her shoes on the floor as she moved toward the small balcony, the soft metallic sound of the railing under her fingers as she leaned lightly, surveying the cityscape with a steady, unwavering gaze. The subtle warmth of the rising sun illuminated the corners of her room, casting long, gentle shadows that shifted as the light expanded across the walls, emphasizing the textures of the furniture, the soft folds of the curtains, and the quiet order that filled the space. Jasmine considered the lessons and guidance imparted by her father, Colonel Marcus Carter, the weight of their meaning settling within her. As she observed the world with the attentive, calm awareness he had instilled in her over the years. Each reflection, each glimmer of light, each subtle movement outside the window became a study in the nuances of presence, perception, and quiet authority, reinforcing the inner strength that she had cultivated. The city slowly grew more animated, yet the soft, filtered light and the gentle rhythm of morning activity allowed Jasmine a private moment of reflection and equilibrium, a pause that reinforced her poise and awareness. She adjusted her stance, feeling the balance of her body and the calm energy within, noting the interplay of the external environment and her internal composure. Across the street, a bus rolled past, its wheels whispering against the wet pavement, and Jasmine noticed the subtle reactions of people on the sidewalks, the way they adjusted their movements with awareness, and she felt the resonance of connection between observation and action, the unspoken communication that flowed through careful attention. She allowed her gaze to linger for a moment longer on the city awakening, absorbing the serene yet dynamic panorama, understanding that her presence, awareness, and steady composure had carried her through challenges, guided her choices, and would continue to shape the way the world responded to her. Jasmine finally stepped back from the balcony, letting her eyes rest on the soft, golden light filtering through the room, feeling the quiet satisfaction of readiness and the confident assurance that the morning held the promise of new encounters, each one met with the clarity, insight, and grounded poise she had cultivated in the stillness of her apartment, the gentle morning air, and the first light of day.